Good morning and welcome to the HT Radar Research Conference. We're so happy that you've taken the time to join us today as we host one of the only national research conferences focused solely on human trafficking issues in North America. My name is Kimbery Jones and I'm the director of the Center for Justice and Reconciliation at Point Loma Nazarene University. Today, we welcome researchers and presenters from across the country, and the pandemic gave us the silver lining opportunity to take the conference online, opening up the possibility for participants to join us from anywhere in the world, and you have, so welcome from whatever time zone you are joining us from. To start our time together, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Bob Brauer, president of Point Loma Nazarene University. Dr. Brauer has served as the university president since 1997, bringing leadership to the institution as it has grown substantially in both our programming and in the number of students we reach. A Christian liberal arts university, PLNU offers more than 60 undergraduate areas of study, as well as graduate, doctoral, and undergraduate degree completion programs, serving over 4,600 students. Dr. Brauer recognizes the importance of the university's role in our region to collaborate in the work to end trafficking and has dedicated resources from the university to support the community's efforts. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Brauer.
Thank you, Kim, and please accept my warm welcome to each of you. I'm so glad that you are a part of this conference today. And it's really a conference for the many individuals in our community and around the world that need these collaborative efforts to continue to address human trafficking and to support those caught in this exploitation. So thank you for being a part of this, and thank each of you for what you are doing to end trafficking, not only here in San Diego, but throughout the nation and the world as you all engage in your work. HT Radar began with a small group of like-minded researchers and stakeholders who were concerned about human trafficking, particularly in the San Diego region, and as a result came together for action. In 2016, this informal gathering took a more formalized approach and organized into HT Radar under the direction of the Center for Justice and Reconciliation here at Point Loma. This effort became a professional network that would grow to be a key nexus for research related to human trafficking and the strategies to promote collaboration throughout San Diego. Gratefully, this work is funded by the County of San Diego Public Safety Group and continues to be coordinated by Point Loma's Center for Justice and Reconciliation. HT Radar also works collaboratively with the San Diego County Human Trafficking and Commercial Sexual Exploitation of Children Advisory Council, and we're grateful for that partnership. Our purpose includes gathering researchers, analysts, and other stakeholders to share data, increase research funding, implement research findings, and influence decision-making with this quality research. HT Radar hosts quarterly meetings featuring national research, an annual conference like this one, and the dissemination of research to our regional partners. It is our hope that today's conference will expand the vision and commitment of each of us for this important work and for the lives and well-being of valued members of our communities. Again, thank you for joining us today. I hope this is a very productive and useful time and that it continues to promote all of our work wherever we are involved and engaged. So thank you, Kim, and let me turn the program back over to you to introduce our keynote speakers today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brauer. And now I am just thrilled to introduce our morning keynote speakers, San Diego District Attorney Summer Stephan and Lauren Hersh, founder and national director of World Without Exploitation. District Attorney Summer Stephan has devoted her life to protecting children and families, providing justice to the most vulnerable, and is a national leader in the fight against human trafficking and sexual exploitation. Summer is focused on advancing public safety through fair and equal justice, bringing solutions to complex issues with a unique, data-driven, common sense approach that works to address the root causes of certain crimes driven by mental illness and addiction. As district attorney, she leads the second largest DA's office in California, managing a professional staff of 1,000 employees, serving as the people's prosecutor for San Diego County and its more than 3 million residents. Lauren Hersh is an internationally recognized lawyer, activist, educator, and writer working to combat violence against women and girls in schools, online, and in the legal arena. She is the founder and national director of World Without Exploitation, the national coalition to end human trafficking and sexual exploitation. She's recognized as one of New York's new abolitionists and is the former chief of sex trafficking unit at the Kings County District Attorney's Office. When we began to plan this year's conference, the two people who stuck out to us most as the perfect launch to such an important day were Summer and Lauren. Their influence is felt across the United States and intersects as they partner together to advance our nation's anti-trafficking work. In this unique opportunity to hear from both of them at the same time, we decided to bring them together in a conversation about where we've been and where we are heading. I'm so thrilled to welcome my colleagues and my friends, Summer and Lauren, this morning.
So good to be with you, Kim. Thank you so much for your work in this arena that now spans so many years. I remember when we started. And Dr. Brauer, thank you for your generosity and your passion for this topic and lending your university's voice and powerful educational platform, which is so needed in this area. So I'm so excited. And of course, whenever I see Lauren, it's a very good day.
Thank you so much, Summer. Well, I echo all of your thanks to Kim and Dr. Brauer. It's the academia is such an essential component to combating human trafficking and sexual exploitation. And we're so immensely grateful for your leadership, Kim. You're doing such cutting edge work, and bringing folks together for this important conversation is really groundbreaking. So thank you to your university, and thank you, Kim, for your leadership. And of course, to my friend, Summer, what a true honor for me to be in conversation with you today. For me, as a former prosecutor, this is full circle. I'm so thrilled to be able to have this space with you, to really dig into these issues, to look at where we've been and where we're going. And truly, there is nobody out there from a prosecutorial platform doing this work in the way that you're doing it. And so just the best of the best. And we're really excited. I'm excited to speak with you, but also to learn from you.
And I'm so thrilled that I get to stay a part of this keynote by moderating a conversation between the two of you who I admire and respect so deeply. And so that's such a great segue, Lauren, into my opening question for Summer is actually, I'd love for you to tell us, Summer, about your work and your focus on anti-trafficking efforts in San Diego.
Well, it's a long story, so we're going to shortcut. And I'm going to begin by just saying that today's forum, this research conference that brings the brightest, best minds, the best hearts around the table, even though it's a virtual table, it's still a table, and we want you to think of it that way, is really testament to what is going on. It is a testament to the best of what we're doing, because when we dignify topics with research and with data, that means that we care about uncovering the truth and sidelining stereotypes and really giving dignity to people that are harmed through data and research, through academia, through bringing the brightest and the best ideas using evidence-based practices. So today is a dream. It's a long time dream that this topic that really wasn't discussed at this level with people around the nation has come true. And maybe I'm always looking for like the best quotes for anything that I do, because there's so many people smarter than me that have said it so much better. But I think appropriate for where we are today is a quote by the amazing Harriet Tubman. Of course, everybody understands what Harriet stands for. And she said, every great dream begins with a dreamer. Always remember you, that means each one of you joining us today, you have within you the strength, the patience, and the passion to reach for the stars and change the world. And what we are asking of all of us today is to take a step forward in changing the world so that our world does not include the exploitation and enslavement of people for sex or labor. Isn't it about time that we have that kind of world? Sadly, we don't live in that world. We have taken huge leaps in making that world better. And I'm proud that my team at the DA's office in San Diego was a part of that journey. It was a long journey, and I've been a prosecutor protecting the most vulnerable for 31 years, rose through the ranks to become the elected district attorney in 2018. But I don't think of myself that way. I only think of myself as the prosecutor for the people who need us. But what I do remember is that 20 years ago, this didn't look like it looks today at all. The only thing society looked at was kids, women, men on the streets as prostitutes. That's where we were. And the reason we were there, and I want to put a footnote on this, because as a lawyer, and Lauren also shares this, laws are the heartbeat. The rule of law is the heartbeat of our country. So why did we think of this as just a prostitution issue, a simple, just take that person that's prostituting off the street and everything is okay? Why did we think of it that way? It's because we didn't even have a human trafficking law. I want to set and underscore that, because if you don't even have a law as a nation, you haven't even acknowledged that harm. You haven't given anyone the tools to deal with that harm. And so we didn't have human trafficking laws federally or on the state side till 21 years ago, the year 2000. Which was the landmark year that we began. So that's why I want to think about our journey as we talk today as this 20-year journey, essentially. That's very short in historic time, and how far we've come to have this event today, and how far we've come in San Diego, which I'm proud has set a national standard on how you fight human trafficking, how you give dignity to victims, is where we started. Was the same as the rest of the nation, with complete misunderstanding. And where we are today is with an advisory council that supports these efforts, the research efforts, with a human trafficking task force that's victim-centered, trauma-informed, with new laws that are cutting edge, that protect victims and identify perpetrators, the real perpetrators, the demand side, the perpetrators that are committing the human trafficking, and with a thirst for more data and research so that we know how to end this in a very, very precise manner. So we need all of you to engage with us with this, so that the next, hopefully not even 20 years, the next 10 years will bring another wave of transformational change towards ending slavery, at least in the United States.
Thank you, Summer. Lauren, tell us about World Without Exploitation and speak to the importance of working in collaboration on policy and the legislative level.
Sure. Kim, if you don't mind, there's so many things that Summer said that I'd love to just respond to really quickly.
Yes.
And then I'll tell you about World We and really drive home the importance of collaboration, because truthfully, no entity can do this work alone. If we're going to be impactful, we have to be interconnected, lifting up the strengths of all of the organizations in the space. So I want to start there by saying collaboration is key in order to combat exploitation. But it's so interesting, Summer, because when I first started doing this work right around in 2007. So I was a New York City prosecutor. At the time, I was a domestic violence prosecutor when I first stumbled on these kinds of cases. And 2007 was about the time where New York State passed the first human trafficking law. And so you know that during that time, and I agree with you, I think it's important to look at just how far we've come in that short time. But at that time, we were just at the stage where when people said human trafficking, people would think about foreign-born victims in faraway places. And not recognizing that human trafficking was happening in our backyards, and it was happening to people, women and girls, LGBTQ plus youth, boys in our community. Nobody knew that. In fact, when I first started doing this work, I didn't know it either. And I stumbled on a case because a domestic violence case came into my office. And it was, the police paperwork was clear as day. This woman was a domestic violence victim. She came into my office. She had severe bruising on her face. I started peppering her with questions, probably not the best and most strategic way to actually uncover what was transpiring. But the reality was that I was a pretty victim-centered prosecutor and had always had a pretty good rapport with victims. And I couldn't make headway with this young woman. And so I took a little bit of a break. I got her some food. I had her just relax. And then I went back in and I started, instead of asking her questions, yes and no questions, asking her just open-ended questions. And what I recognized very quickly was, yes, according to the police paperwork, and also in her mind, this guy who had beaten her was her boyfriend, but he was also her pimp. And under this new law that nobody had really used in New York, he was her trafficker. And that was really the first time that it occurred to me that we had a serious trafficking problem. That was what my instinct was screaming in New York City. And from there, I ultimately, long story short, created a sex trafficking unit at the district attorney's office. But I share that to really share the fact that this is such a new crime in the scheme of what we're prosecuting, what we're handling, and we've learned so much over the last 2 decades. And also to say that the vast majority of my perspective really comes from those days where I was running out to crime scenes and pulling 12-year-olds out of a brothel or out of the arms of a pimp. And so I know we're going to talk a lot about policy and legislation. My experience certainly has driven my perspective on policy, which I think Summer and I will talk about. And I think we sort of see what good policy looks like very similarly. Okay, World Without Exploitation. So that was a mouthful. I know I went in a different direction, but World Without Exploitation is a national coalition designed to combat human trafficking and sexual exploitation. We created World Without Exploitation about 5 years ago, recognizing that there was such extraordinary work happening around the country. But for the vast majority of those doing the work, they had kind of 2 things in common. The partners were overworked and under-resourced. And it's so in these key moments where we wanted to move policy or we wanted to move legislation, these organizations would say, we know the right thing, we just don't have the capacity to help you move the needle. And so we were born as sort of the connective tissue in the movement to help people leverage partnerships, to be able to really lift up survivor voices and put them in the front, not just sharing their stories, but making sure that they were at the helm of what is good policy and how do we advance good policy. And I know you'll hear from some of those key survivors. And then the last piece of this is just exactly what you drove home, Kim, which is the importance for collaboration. I would say World Without Exploitation has been very successful over the last 5 years in really key moments because we've done what we do best. We've made a lot of phone calls. We've hired a lot of buses and gotten a lot of people plane tickets. We've brought people together so that they can ultimately stand up and fight for what they know to be right because they're working on the ground in the trenches. And so we have to be listening to the voices of those with lived experiences and then the allies who are working alongside them.
Yeah, that's such a great segue, Lauren, because one of the things we wanted to talk about was really looking at that trajectory that we're on and even acknowledging how young this movement is really relatively. So Summer, you pioneered the Sex Crimes and Human Trafficking Division at the DA's office. Can you reflect a little bit on how things have changed? Lauren spoke to that some on how her understanding changed, but how has the DA's office even evolved in the way since you first launched that division?
Yeah, it was a dream for me, and I had 3 no's every time I wanted to form it. So the usual thing that dreamers get. But that's why the persistence that Harriet Tubman talked about, we formed it between 2003 and 2005. And it was a first for San Diego. And what I wanted it to address at the time, we didn't have a human trafficking law. I wanted it to address when a non-stranger harms a child, woman, man, or anybody, any human sexually, that's just as harmful. But we didn't have the expertise. People, would run a different direction if it's not a stranger rape, if you will. This is very similar to what we see in human trafficking, because most human traffickers are known to their victim. There are bonds, whether they're their employer, they're their boyfriend, they're the father of their children, they're an uncle, a trusted. There is that familial connection. And so when we formed it, it was all volunteer group that would come in, but they have to be like Top Gun. And we started to change the world. And we started cases that would normally never see the light. We were able to put together and bring investigations and victim advocates. So then when we got this report from the FBI that placed San Diego on one of the top 13 cities for child prostitution. That's what they called it. Now, how far we've come, that term would never be used by the FBI or anybody because we all understand there is no child prostitution. If they're children, they can't consent, they're human trafficking victims. They are not prostitute and child, just not in the same sentence. And so that was the title, though, of the FBI, and that's what drove us to change the legislation so that California would have a human trafficking law, which came on board in 2005. And because my sex crimes unit was up and running, we added human trafficking and we prosecuted the first case under the California human trafficking law, People versus Hall. And like Lauren mentioned, when we took this case to court, the judge was expecting a foreign individual who wasn't a US citizen, who was put in the back of a trunk and forced and transported. And that wasn't the case. It was a young lady who accepted a ride with some men who then ended up drugging her and having people pay to have sex with her, which is human trafficking. So it was brand new, and then the journey began. What's next? Where's the labor trafficking? And it started to grow and grow and grow until we got to 2 years ago, when San Diego was able to move the needle by data, 27% increase in reporting. And thus the human trafficking division was able to deal with those cases, because we know from all the studies, that's why I'm obsessed with studies and research, that the number one reason human trafficking thrives so much is it's underreported because the victims don't even recognize themselves as victims. The biggest shift we've seen through this time that we started this unit is that, and Polaris is noting this, we've noted this locally with the task force, is victims are themselves reporting. That's when you start to have breakthroughs, is when victims recognize themselves as victims and not as the problem. That's when you've actually penetrated and are starting to make pretty transformational change. So we are on this journey now from 2003, 2005 to now, and the unit is in great hands with great leadership with Melissa Diaz and Carolyn Matzker and Mary Ellen Barrett, and we're moving forward.
Lauren, you too have talked about just how your understanding has evolved since you started the sex crimes unit at Kings County as a prosecutor to what you know now today. Any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I would say that in terms of, well, here's where I'll start. When I first started doing this work I eventually became the chief of the sex trafficking unit, but at first, like what Summer said, I got a lot of no's. And then I finally got somebody who looked at me and said, you want to make these cases? Knock yourself out. And so I did. And actually, I think maybe the first thing that I learned was just how hard these cases were to make. That first year that I was in the organized crime unit, just kind of learning as much as I could learn, I thought immediately I'd be able to make the case. It took me about a year to make my first case. And so when you see these cases, especially these cases that are filled with really substantial evidence, those prosecutors have worked tirelessly to build those cases. And in the San Diego DA's situation, they're working so hard to build the cases with evidence to take the pressure off of the victim. Because we know, and what I kind of figured out pretty quickly was that these victims oftentimes were too traumatized and too terrified to talk. And so the building of these cases has to rely on substantial evidence. I got the fact that there was so much harm happening to those who were sold in the sex trade. I saw that immediately. I also saw the extraordinary harm that was being caused by traffickers. That was obvious. I was having, young person after young person come into my office with like substantial physical injury, substantial emotional trauma, all sorts of things. What I didn't know at that time, and what I've come to learn, was that there's another group of people that are actually fueling the market, that we would not have sex trafficking if there were no demand for commercial sex. So that was, I think, sort of the biggest learning for me. Yes, we have to go after traffickers, but if we're not also going after sex buyers, the demand for commercial sex, then we are never going to actually solve the problem, because it's the demand for commercial sex that's fueling sex trafficking. Couple other things that I quickly learned. I know everybody wants to talk about child sex trafficking. It tugs on people's heartstrings, but in my time as a prosecutor, what I came to learn, and it took a little bit of time, was that the vast majority of these young people, although they may enter the sex trade and they may be exploited at a very young age, under the age of 18, after they've had an 18th birthday, they don't become any less exploited. And so it is so critical that when we're creating laws, when we're implementing laws, when we're looking at what good policy is, that we're also thinking about people who've had an 18th birthday, because the reality is they're ensnared in really significant ways, and we need to make sure that they get the help they need. And then the final thing, Kim, that I know we're going to dig into, so I won't spend too much time about this, but I think honestly, when I was in college and law school, I had heard often that legalizing the sex trade would make it safer. But what I came to learn was no matter what kind of legal protections you put on the sex trade, you could never, ever make it safe. And the only way to actually help those who are being sold in the sex trade is to take their buyers out of the equation, reduce the demand, and shrink and ultimately eliminate the market. And so this notion of legalizing or decriminalizing, I think it's a misguided policy. And I think it's very harmful. And I hope that we get to unpack that. And I think what I also learned was that there is an alternative. It's called the equality model, or partial decriminalization, which looks to decriminalize the person who's sold in the sex trade, providing that person with exit strategies and services. But at the same time, and this part is very important, we need to make sure we're holding accountable the pimps, the sex buyers, and the brothel owners for the devastating harm they cause.
Thank you, Lauren. Yes, and we are
on Lauren's point there, Kim, just really quickly, because this is an opportunity. Everything Lauren said was like its own whole show, but one thing that because this is a research platform here, it's really important to tell you that, Lauren didn't just make the point that when you turn 18, the harm doesn't stop, even though you entered as a minor. Very important, the research that was done by Point Loma Nazarene, where you're all guests here, and USD, a landmark study that was done in 2016 to support Lauren's point, found that law enforcement doesn't encounter a sex trafficking victim on an average until 3 years later. So while the average age the study found in San Diego is 16 years old, with many younger victims of entry and many older victims, police is not on an average encountering or finding them, and I have my theories about that, until 3 years pass. So now they're adults. How did their status then change all of a sudden, and they're no longer victims? That's just a falsehood. So that's why research is so important, because presenting that to law enforcement and education helped change hearts and minds as to how police work with victims that they encounter, and how they don't immediately reach the conclusion that they are the suspect.
Yeah.
So that might lead into a question or two.
Yes.
I don't know.
Well, Summer, that's such a good point, because we really have seen a shift in how law enforcement and prosecutors have changed to a more victim-centered approach. How do you think that shift has impacted the larger effort to eradicate trafficking?
Well, I think the shift in law enforcement, is been a key part for San Diego and around the nation for this transformation, because without police being educated and trained on human trafficking, the signs of it, that their first look at someone that may appear to be the person that has the prostitution, that's committing the prostitution, to ask themselves the first question is, who is prostituting them? Who is exploiting them? That shift, where that's the first question, that's been transformational for San Diego. But that came over time. First, we had the law in 2005. We formed small task forces where everybody who's touching these cases is trained. We then went to a very large task force. The education, especially when I personally taught the task force and brought the information. Look at this data. This is their age of entry. You all in this room now agree that children can't consent. You agree that if you encountered a child whose uncle is molesting him or her, that you would arrest the uncle and you wouldn't look at the child as the problem, the 16-year-old. Now, what if the uncle paid $1 or $100 or $500 for that? Wouldn't you still arrest the uncle versus arresting the child? Well, what if you don't, we fail as a system and we don't find the child because the child is convinced they're in trouble if we find them. And the child is in hiding. Now you find them 3 years later. Should your whole attitude and information you just learned change? Or do you still then look at that uncle, whoever it is, in whatever form they take, organized crime, a gang member, a husband, a boyfriend, whatever form they're in, shouldn't we now look at the uncle? So for San Diego, this has been a transformation. As an example, last year, every operation they did was a demand operation. They did not do operations to try to get the persons that are potentially ones would be charged with prostitution. So that shift is really taking hold, and we hope that it continues to travel nationally.
So to that point, Lauren, what else needs to be done from the law enforcement and prosecution side of the issue?
I mean, you see that San Diego's doing a lot right. And actually what we're doing in our conversations with law enforcement is we're shining a light on prosecutors that are doing this really well. San Diego being, at the forefront. I think that there are a lot of folks in law enforcement who feel that they need to continue arresting those sold in the sex trade because they feel like they need to sort of dangle those criminal cases over victims' heads. And that's actually something that I saw a lot as a prosecutor, that police would come in, the way that they would actually access the case was that they would arrest the victim, and then they would say, if you work with the prosecution, we'll dismiss the case against you and have you testify against the trafficker. The problem with that, frankly, is that it just doesn't work. I mean, what ultimately happens is you'd have a witness who bolted in about 30 seconds. There's a material witness. So and the reason it doesn't work is because it is so important in all cases, but especially in these cases, for there to be trust, that victim feels like at the end of the day, you are a person that you really mean what you say, that you're going to help that person. And so dangling that criminal prosecution over the victim's head, it just doesn't work in these kinds of cases. And so what we're encouraging prosecutors and law enforcement to do is exactly what Summer's saying, which is go after the demand, go after the traffickers, build these evidence-based cases, and try to bring victims along, and that takes time, by making sure that we're giving them the exit strategies and services and safety that they need in order to ultimately exit the sex trade. It takes time, but ultimately exit the sex trade. And then if and when they get to a point where they feel safe and they trust you, I had a lot of success bringing victims along and ultimately having them testify. And I think it was because I was very clear that I wasn't going to prosecute them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lauren, what have we learned about who is fueling the sex trade?
I mean, it's so clear that without the demand for commercial sex, we would not have sex trafficking. So I like to think about a place like Amsterdam or Germany, where the sex trade is legal. In those places, we know that they're sex tourist destinations. So bachelor parties go to Amsterdam, business trips go to Amsterdam as a result of and they know that they can operate with complete impunity in purchasing sex because it's legal. And so as a result, what you end up doing in a place like Amsterdam, where there's a legal sex trade, is spiking the demand for commercial sex. There's just simply never going to be enough, quote unquote, voluntary supply, if you will, because the vast majority of people don't land in prostitution because of choice. They land in prostitution because of lack of options, because of lack of choice, because of force, because of coercion. And so in places like Amsterdam, what you end up finding is that traffickers know that the legal brothels in Amsterdam are the perfect place to bring victims. And so in Amsterdam, in Germany, what you tend to find is women and sometimes girls, boys and men who are not local. They're foreign born and oftentimes very marginalized. And so what makes, I mean, this is sort of business 101. If we reduce the demand for commercial sex, then traffickers will not be putting victims into those places because they won't be purchased. There's no money-making opportunity there. And so I think the best strategy out there is to eliminate the demand for commercial sex.
So we were talking about this the other day. When I think about the anti-trafficking movement, I often think about, we talked about this a little bit earlier this morning, the domestic violence movement, and how we can reflect on how far that movement has come over decades of work, and how eventually leaders in the domestic violence movement were able to shift the cultural narrative so that the public now really understands what domestic violence is. And there's a new norm that it's not acceptable, along with institutionalizing the prevention and the services around DV. We're not there yet with the anti-trafficking work. But with both of your backgrounds in prosecuting domestic violence and with your careers focused on decreasing exploitation, what do you think we can take away from the DV space that's helpful as the human trafficking movement evolves? Summer, I'll throw that to you.
You've asked a perfect question, because if we look at an area with a vulnerable victim, many times in domestic violence, where the power relationship is off center, meaning the person who's abused doesn't have the purse strings, they rely on the abusers for economics, they are worried about custody for their children, they're worried about shame in their families, in their community. All of those factors that exist in domestic violence certainly carry over to human trafficking. And so, but we've been at the domestic violence fight for much longer. So now jurors don't really ask, like, why is the domestic violence victim recanting on the stand? It's almost expected. You go into the trial knowing that the victim is not going to be on board many times because of those love bonds, those trauma bonds, the long-term isolation from their support systems, which is the number one thing that domestic violence abusers do, is they separate you so you only depend on them. Every maneuver is almost identical to what we see in human trafficking. But where we've made huge strides, and I want to report to you one figure that will, I think, in a very good way, astound everybody who's listening here today. Just as to the value of research and then training and education around that research. So Dr. Campbell did this landmark study on what behaviors, what red flags eventually lead or are the most indicative of a domestic violence homicide. So the ultimate harm, that somebody's going to be killed. And at the top of that chain, there is like substance abuse, right? There's mental illness, there's all of the factors we can think about. but at the top of that was strangulation. That the partner put his hands or her hands around somebody's throat. Just that, even if no injury resulted when they did that, there was not, the person didn't go to the hospital. Seeing that study drove essentially transformational work that started 4 years ago. What we did is we took that study, we presented it to law enforcement, we changed the very form that police fill out so that it had a question on it for DV where they have to ask, were hands around your throat? Were you strangled? Which the victims never report unless you ask. And then also a domestic violence forensic interview where a nurse, just like sexual assault, checks for those signs. We had one case where the nurse discovered that actually there was a laceration. And if left alone and not sent to the ER for immediate care, the victim could have died from that laceration or lost her ability to speak. So her life was saved. So now 4 years later, what has happened that we've had the protocol? Domestic violence homicides contributed to 13 to 14% strangulation mode of our domestic violence murders. In 4 years, that is now 2.3%. And the entire domestic violence homicide has dropped by 15% for all 4 years compared to the 4 years before. So not like just a blip in the horizon. So this is a great example of taking science and research, using it to drive good action that then makes victims safer and puts away. It also tripled our felony ability to charge felony domestic violence because strangulation is felony domestic violence. So totally like a perfect example. And this is why I was so excited about this conference, doing this again in San Diego, because somebody on this should be researching exactly what are those key factors and where do we put that pressure point and reverse that factor, both on why people buy the demand, why people traffic, and why victims become vulnerable to trafficking, on all three parts of the formula that combines to make for human trafficking.
Kim, if you don't mind, I just quickly want to respond. It's so smart and it's so spot on, because I think that when you look at kind of where we are in the human trafficking arena, we're sort of just at the point where the domestic violence movement was when cops were going to the house and telling the guy to like cool off and walk around the block. Like that's where we are as a human trafficking movement. And it's so, and I think the piece that has really lagged for us, of course, there's some academic institutions like Point Loma that have done some really critical research, but I think that the research has, if we were able to get some really significant data on all three pressure points that you just articulated, I think it will thrust us forward so quickly. Because I think that when you go in and right, you probably speak to police officers all the time. When you go and you talk to police officers and you try to shift that practice, the thing that is most impactful is the data. And so, and I think that that's ultimately, obviously I'm a big proponent on like, let's just prevent all of this from happening, but the response is so important. And so we need to bring police officers along in this realm. I think there are, of course, some extraordinary police departments that are doing really incredible work, but I think that there's definitely some room to grow, and having that research and data will be able to lift that up and expedite that work so that we're protecting more victims.
And that's fair though, too, for police departments. I mean, our experience has been they want to help, they want to do good, they don't want to come to crime scenes with people hurt, but it's not really fair to ask them to change a practice without giving them the data why this is going to make the victim safer. We were able to do that in domestic violence, so they happily engaged in it. And want to give a kudos to my Chief Deputy Tracy Pryor, who went to each police department and everybody signed on. And I'm really proud of that. We see the Gabby Petito case as an example of strangulation. Now the nation is paying attention to strangulation as this big factor. And we're hoping that across the nation, they will follow the San Diego model on how you really intervene in strangulation. But remember, a lot of our human trafficking victims are strangled. That is, when we find them as serial murder victims, when we find them at crime scenes, strangulation is a big part of it. It's kind of like, I have your life in my hands. That's the dominion and control wheel. That's the same with domestic violence as it is in human trafficking.
And just to underscore, this part is so, I think what you're saying is so key. This is not just at the hands of traffickers, but oftentimes we hear from survivors that it is sex buyers who are putting their hands on victims and strangling. Because when you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? They're so close in proximity. And we're hearing all of the time from survivors just how violent that sex buyers have been with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So let's shift a little bit and let's talk about legislation and how it's impacted anti-trafficking efforts. Summer, how has the way we legislate impacted victims of trafficking?
Right. So we've had some good things, but we've also had doors shut. Whenever we've tried to increase penalties for demand, to make them even just equivalent to a DUI, we have had massive resistance. One of the first bills that I was able to get in this area was to separate. In our prostitution statutes, we had the persons that are being prostituted and the demand in the same section, this 647 for California. We wanted to separate it because we were going to divert our victims that are being prostituted, even if they don't meet the victim definition as defined by law. And we wanted to bring consequences to the buyers. We couldn't do that under equal protection if we didn't separate the statute. So we successfully did that. And I'm very thankful. Assembly member Lorena Fletcher Gonzalez helped us with that, but we couldn't get a demand in that same bill, a demand heightening to bring more accountability. We were able to bring educational mandates for prevention, which is so key that we're using to leverage prevention in the schools. We were able to bring mandated training for hotels and people in industries that may interact with victims. And our laws on the trafficking side are strong. We wanted to also bring some labor trafficking laws to not allow employers to take somebody's documentation, their visas, because that's a tool that's being used, and that's kind of didn't work out, but we'll try again. But we haven't again been able to make transformational demand side legislation. But maybe Lauren has some positive experiences from other states.
It's so interesting. I think that there are, Texas just passed just an increased penalty on sex buyers. I think it really does require a lot of education to get to the place where these sorts of laws get passed, because I think they require a deep understanding that sex buyers are fueling the market for sex trafficking. I think once you connect those dots, I think people understand it, and then there's the possibility of movement on the legislative front. Obviously, we're in this really complicated moment in time, which is sort of the backdrop to all of this. And it's really making us look at like a lot of the legislation that we're looking to move. Originally, we were like, let's just move the equality model in a number of states. And now we're thinking, let's do this incrementally. Let's do this slowly. Let's do this carefully. Let's do it while making sure that we're helping people along to get to this place. So in certain places, we're pushing legislation that increases accountability for sex buyers. And in certain places, we're actually trying to make sure that there's vacatur for victims and that there are ways, mechanisms in place so that victims are not being prosecuted. So I think that there are certain jurisdictions that are poised to really move that equality model package forward. But I think in certain jurisdictions, I think it's gonna really require an incremental approach.
And thanks, Lauren, for mentioning vacatur. Yeah, vacatur did pass in California, and we are using it, and the stories are amazing of having, we don't view it, in San Diego, we established a model where there's a trauma-informed interview by a provider like Free to Thrive and others or our second chance at the public defender. They interview the victim as to why vacatur, why the crimes, why her life history shows these crimes are connected to her victimization or his or their victimization. And then we look at the petition, we vet it, we make sure we don't have any information that shows a different story. And then we usually stipulate and agree and go to a judge who is informed and educated to get the vacatur. And I can tell you that I'm out in the community sometime and I have people come up to me and say they got a lease on life back because they don't have that criminal record weighing them down. So vacatur laws, and then we also in California passed the laws that on children, there isn't a charge of prostitution for children. What we do need to make stronger is the restraining order parts where you don't charge the child, but you have a legal mechanism to keep the trafficker away from them civilly, where they're protected from going back into that layer.
But Kim, can we talk just for a minute about sort of the laws on the other side that people are seeking to pass, which is these full decriminalization laws and how just deeply problematic they are? So just sort of as an entry point, I know to some people, when they hear the word decriminalization, what they think it means is decriminalizing the person sold in the sex trade. What they don't understand is that these decriminalization laws actually not just decriminalize the person sold in the sex trade, but they also decriminalize the pimp, the sex buyer, and the brothel owner. And I think that when people start understanding the truth of what these decriminalization laws are, I don't think there's going to be such a big appetite for them, because I think to the average person, they understand just how harmful that other side of the equation is. And it's not really anything new, because Rhode Island actually in 1980 passed a full decriminalization law. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly read this. Rhode Island decriminalized indoor prostitution between 1980 and 2009. As a result, the state became a regional sex tourism hub with high rates of sex trafficking, violence, and extensive criminal involvement, prompting the state to revert back and adopt strict laws against the sex trade in 2009. And I think I want to just underscore that where you have a situation where there's a legal sex trade, you inevitably welcome a whole host of other kinds of crimes right in that vicinity. And so, so it's interesting. So I had a close relationship when I was a prosecutor with a police inspector that I would work a lot of these cases with. So I would spend a lot of hours out in areas of Brooklyn in the middle of the night with this guy, and we would talk a lot. And he said, at one point it occurred to him that a number of the unsolved murders in Hunts Point probably had something to do with sex trafficking, because oftentimes they were young girls who went missing. Nobody was looking for them. Oftentimes they were women and girls of color who were poor. So, the public there wasn't such an Gabby Petito outcry. And so we have to recognize that the kinds of crime that happens when decriminalization happens, it's really devastating to a community. And that's not talking about all the harm that happens to victims. So I think there's a really big push out there right now for full decriminalization. I think we have a heavy lift. I don't know if this is appropriate for me to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, because I always sort of speak truth. But the reality is I know there's a huge outcry for criminal justice reform. And I think, Summer, you would agree, for some good reason out there, for some good reason. And the answer is not hands off, we're going to do nothing. It's a more nuanced, more thoughtful way of policing these situations. Because I think that if you go into these communities where it's their kids, their young people who are victimized, they're not saying, we don't want the police. They're saying, we want better policing. We want community policing. We want to be heard, and we want to be taken care of.
Yeah, Lauren, it's such a myth, because and Lauren and I have talked about this. We have done this work over 20 years to transform the community's vision and view of victims of human trafficking, and so that they're seen as human beings with dignity. They're our children. How many times have you heard me say that, Kim? These are our children. These aren't those children. These are our children, no matter what age they are. They're our sisters, our brothers, that are being sold like a piece of pizza for labor or sex. That's who they are. So what has happened, and this is really important, is this education that Lauren and I and mounds of collaborators have done so well and have actually penetrated is being used by those who have a special interest in essentially making profit by decriminalizing and not having to worry about the protection of the police. They're using that very education we did that sympathize and make victims real to say we need to decriminalize to protect those very victims, instead of saying, no, we need to make sure those buying them and those selling them are accountable so that they can be free. Or saying, we failed as a society if the only thing available as a job for a person who's transgender or LGBTQ or poor or doesn't come from wealth is to become a prostitute. And this is what I ask everybody who gives me this argument. So your dream for your child is for them to become a prostitute, to be in a dark room where somebody can pay and do anything to them without the protection of police. If they start screaming, it's still consensual. That's your dream for your child. So I'm, sorry for the passion over this, but the reason that we need to wake up as a society is the work that we did on the ground to have people see victims as victims is being used to now harm victims by taking away the ability to hold to account the buyers and the sellers.
And the other part of this equation, of course, 100% to everything that you just said, Summer, is when you speak to survivors, they echo what Summer has just said. They don't feel that that decriminalizing the sex trade is the right way to handle the situation. And they are really, I know after we speak, I know you have a panel of survivors who are going to come on, and I think it's worth asking them, well, what do you think about this? Because we, in Washington, D.C., there was a situation several years ago where City Council, there was a piece of legislation to decriminalize the sex trade in City Council, and hundreds of survivors descended upon Washington, D.C., and hundreds of survivors signed a letter to City Council saying, we do not want full decriminalization. We do not think that that is the way to keep people safe. And we do not think that that is the way to ultimately come to a place of gender equality, right? When it's, when it's the vast majority of those who are buying are men with disposable income, buying the bodies of women and girls and LGBTQ plus youth of color who are poor. We have a situation of pure inequality, and survivors will say this much more eloquently than I will, but clearly it's not what survivors want. What survivors want is the equality model, decriminalizing those sold in the sex trade, providing exit strategies and services, and at the same time holding accountable those who exploit.
This is such a wonderful way to wrap up our conversation, which I could sit here all day with the two of you. And I'm sure most of our audience feels that way too, to hear this, but this issue of the survivor voice, because I know both of you well, and I know your work. You have a commitment to lifting up survivor voices. It's a commitment that San Diego is working hard to embrace, that at the Center for Justice and Reconciliation, we walk the talk with giving our survivors not just a space at the table, but the ability, the power to make decisions and to create programming. So talk to us about Summer. I want to ask you, I know you live this out, but tell us, why does it matter? And what else do we need? How else do we need to continue to grow around this issue of lifting up and elevating the survivor voice in this work?
Right. So Kim, I mean, to put it simply, when, no one would ever dream in like the medical field to do something to somebody like a surgery or without their consent. You sign all those forms, but unfortunately, laws are made, policies are made that often not just sideline the voice of the very people it could affect, or the very people that experienced it, victims and survivors, but essentially tramples upon it. And so, if you think of it in those simple terms, that is simply not civilized, and it's not dignity. And so it's really important. I just issued a victim survivor blueprint for reform for victims' rights, because remember, reform, criminal justice reform, is really important. But what is important is that it takes in reform for everyone, the folks accused of a crime, and how do we make these systems more equitable and just, but also those who suffer from victimizations, and how do we make the system more equitable and just towards them and include their voices. So this is really super important. The other thing is, government is really good kind of on the cleanup aisle. Is for an immediate fix. You come in, you do your thing, but victims and survivors often suffer the trauma 10 years later. They don't disclose for years later, and there isn't like a arbitrary cutoff to when they get victim compensation. And those things have to go by the wayside. We need to have a system where we can meet the victim where they are, when they're able to disclose, and bring those supportive systems around them without artificial time barriers, because that's not how crime works and harm works in terms of trauma.
So with that thought, Lauren, as a closing thought, will you share with us, where have you seen survivors move the needle because of their leadership and because they've been given the position of authority?
I mean, in a million places, honestly. So just yesterday, the World Survivor Leadership Council came to us a bunch of months ago, and they said, we want to, you have this webinar series every month. We want to host a webinar, and we want to plan it, we want to completely organize it, and we want to present it. And we said, fine. And so they actually came together, a number of survivors came together for a few days in Orlando. They all got COVID tested, and they stayed in a house together, and they put on this webinar yesterday for 2 hours. It was so powerful. And the thing that was so powerful about it was there was so much wisdom in terms of sort of the integration of the lived experience with the guidance of what great policy looks like. And we've also seen it just sort of all over the place with testimony in DC when there was a full decriminalization hearing, testimony in Louisiana when there was a full decriminalization hearing, in New York State, the New York State Anti-Trafficking Coalition is led by survivors who are really kind of figuring out how to move the equality model. And so, I think that we just need to create space for true survivor leadership, because pretty much every single time it's that leadership that advances the work that we all want to do.
Mm-hmm. What a great way to end this incredible conversation. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We are so grateful to have two women like you leading such important work. And I just thank you on behalf of all of the participants here today for giving us your time this morning to launch us into this day. And so with that, we're going to move now into the morning session, which is flowing in the form of 4 pathway presentations. Hopefully all of you who are watching have poked around on the Whova platform that the conference sits on. It's a really interactive, wonderful platform where you can actually contact everyone who's participating either as a presenter or a participant attending the conference today, and start up conversations. You can start your own chat room. So I just encourage you, even though there's not a lot of downtime for today, I encourage you to poke around and look at some of the capabilities of the platform and take advantage of it, because we have over 500 people registered today to be a part of this process. And so we really want you to participate. So the 4 pathways are going to give you the ability to participate in any way that you choose. The 4 pathways are youth, healthcare, law enforcement and public policy, and community solutions. Now you can follow one pathway all the way through and hear 4 different presentations throughout the day along that pathway focus, or you can jump around however you want. So we really encourage you to design your day in the way that is most informative and helpful to you, and just want you to know that we're going to launch into morning session, part 1 and part 2, and you'll see the full agenda on the conference platform. I'd also like to point out that we have an actual program. If we were with you in person, we would be handing you a beautiful program. We still created that program this year, and it's on the platform as a PDF. I really encourage you to download it, take a look at it. It gives you a lot of detail on everyone who is speaking today. You won't be able to physically be present for every presentation today, but it will give you the opportunity to see who we're featuring and that chance to follow up with them in the future. We are recording most of the sessions. If they are not being recorded, we are making that very clear at the top of the session's informational page. So each session in every pathway has an information page which shows the abstract for the presentation, and oftentimes the PowerPoint will be available to you, and then the actual research paper that the research presentation is based upon. So those informational pages on each presentation are really rich with detail that we encourage you to look into. A note for you, if you're receiving continuing education credits for today's conference, it's really important that you are in the session for the entire duration, and you also must complete the evaluation link that's on the session description for anyone who wants to get the CE credit. We also encourage anyone who would like to complete those evaluation links, please do that. We love feedback. It helps us be better and grow. The chat rooms are not enabled during the presentations, but there is, like I said, on the platform, a very active way to connect with guests separately. And we are going to be taking Q&A in the presentations. It's very tight timing. As I said, hopefully you will have at least a few minutes during the day today to grab your lunch, take a stretch break, but know that we will be taking Q&A. So submit your questions during presentations, and then we'll be moderating questions at the end as much as we have time for. So as we launch into our day, we are going to show you a short video that explains the Whova conference platform and how to best navigate it for those of you who need a little extra help. We'll do that now. And then at the end of that video, this session will end. And you can then decide where to go, take a stretch, and where to go for our next morning session. I hope all of you will come back and join us for two really important sessions. Our second keynote session is right at noon Pacific Standard Time. We are featuring 3 nationally renowned survivor advocates and our own local leader, Jessica Kim, survivor advocate, in a wonderful conversation where we are taking the bold leap into those things that we don't talk about enough in this work. So we have invited some powerhouse women to join us today who are going to be talking about some of those issues that sometimes we aren't paying enough attention to. So please join us at noon, and then at 1 o'clock for another group session where we'll be talking about the San Diego Trafficking Prevention Collective. And then we'll launch into the afternoon, 2 parts of the afternoon sessions. So we have a lot in store for you. None of it will be wasted time. Again, know that you will, because you register for the conference, have access to all of the recorded sessions for the next month until November 15th. So don't panic if you will most likely see 2 presentations going on at the same time that you want to participate in. You can do that. So pick the one you want to see today, or check out those ones that aren't being recorded today, and then know that you can come back at any time in the next month and access the recorded sessions. So with that, I'm just going to launch about a 1.5 minute video that jumps on the platform and shows you a little of the places to navigate it.
You can find our
Start again.
You can find our program on your left under the Resources tab, selecting Program. You can also find it in the description of this particular session. You can navigate the different conference features through Whova by going to the agenda, selecting Sessions, selecting the particular session you'd like to attend. Each of our sessions have a description that include the speakers, where you will be able to view their bio and send direct messages to them. You will find their full abstract and study. For those of you enrolled in continuing education credits, please complete the evaluation at the end of each session to receive full credit on your attendance. You will be able to ask questions in the Q&A portion, and they will be addressed at the end of the conference, at the end of the session. You can also engage in the community board and network with other attendees on the Attendee tab. You can learn about them by viewing their profile and connecting with them directly. Feel free to post your own meetups, job openings, and sharing any other conferences or articles that you are passionate about. You can also create your own virtual community group. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the conference.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we will look forward to seeing you throughout the day, and hope to have all of you join us again all together at our keynote session at 12 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. And with that, I'll end the session, and you can hop on to your next session. The rooms will be opening up. They're probably already open, so we'll look forward to seeing you there. Thank you.